Good evening and welcome once more to our broadcasts. Here at New Ostrog Monastery, the Canadian Orthodox Monastery of All Saints of North America. And we had some more questions to deal with before we go on with the series we'd started on Introduction to the Orthodox Faith. Although I suppose these questions and answers fall into that category as well. As we mentioned before, there are many areas in which there's no absolute doctrine within the Orthodox Church, and because knowledge and understanding are still unfolding in many areas. Consequently, with great wisdom and divine inspiration, the Orthodox Church did not dogmatize and doctrinalize everything that it could possibly come to mind, but rather left many things to unfold as our knowledge increased. The basic ideas that we hold as fundamental to the faith, that everything that exists came into being by the will of God, and the fall of mankind and our salvation. But many things within the understanding of the process by which nature fulfilled God's will and came into being are not really dogmatized or set as doctrines. So their information does come to us, knowledge, understanding, and expands our knowledge and understanding. So we continue to develop along with that knowledge and understanding that comes to pass. So I've been asked why I'm so opposed to creation science. And I'll have to say, first of all, because it's not scientific, it's ideological. And secondly, because creationists, that is scientific, so-called scientific creationists, are forever painting themselves into a corner with one falsehood after another, one vain assumption after another. Many of them sport the title Dr. So-and-so and try to make it seem as if they had a doctorate in physics or science, when in fact many of them have their doctorate from some kind of totally unaccredited Bible school. And sometimes, of course, you can get a mail-order doctorate. So I just wanted to deal with that a little bit, because when people are trying to manipulate science, or the concepts of science, in order to fit an ideology, it is inevitable that they will paint themselves into a corner and make both themselves and the faith look foolish. And this is the very point, that scientific creationists are undermining the gospel of Jesus Christ by putting forth fraudulent, false, untenable surmises as if they were actually fact. Let me give you an example that I was recently chastised by one questioner who told me that I had mentioned that probably some life form will be found on Mars, or the traces of a life form that's now extinct. And we're talking about microbial life. And he said, well, there would have to have been water on Mars, and there's absolutely no evidence that there was ever water on Mars. And this is something that creation scientists or scientific creationists do assert. As a matter of fact, there's a great deal of evidence that not only was there water on Mars, but there still is subterranean water on Mars. Among other things, the clay deposits on Mars could only have been formed in the presence of water. And there are many things that give us evidence that some form of simple, probably microbial life did exist on Mars at one time. So when scientific creationists or creation scientists make these absurd and broad claims, absolutely this, absolutely none of this, absolutely no evidence for that, they actually are ending up making a fool of themselves and ultimately making a fool of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this is one reason why I oppose this so-called creation science so much, because it undermines the gospel and it undermines the veracity of the scripture. While trying to force science to adjust to the scripture, they do not look through the scripture and see how it can have a different kind of revelation to us. Orthodox Christian theology has a complementarity with quantum physics. And I'll try to discuss that a little bit later, although in a 9-minute broadcast, one really can't cover it very well. But I would invite people to read my book, The Evidence of Things Not Seen, Orthodoxy and Modern Physics, to see where that complementarity lies, and to see that we should not be seeking to try to defend a fundamentalist, and not just fundamentalist, a 19th century fundamentalist series of models of reality. To try to defend those by using really 19th century views of science as well, and to try to defend the faith by means of lies and deceits and distortions, and making statements about absolutes when those statements are completely false, either because the person speaking is ignorant, or because he simply wants to falsify his so-called facts, to try to make them correspond with his own models of reality. And you'll hear that term models of reality from me a great deal here, because it's very important. It's the whole core of the Galileo affair, is that Galileo not only challenged, but actually disproved a whole model of reality about the structure of the universe. And this is what I mean about a model of reality being dogmatized. Bruno was burned at stake for telling the truth about the relationship between the Earth and the Sun. He was burned at stake for Copernicanism. And of course, Copernicus was correct. He didn't have all the facts, but he knew that the orbits of the heavenly bodies were not perfect concentric circles, which was the model of reality. He knew that the heavenly bodies were not pulled around by spiritual beings, and because they were embedded in some kind of diaphanous substance that the spiritual beings would pull. And he understood that the elliptical orbits, everything in our solar system, moved around the sun, and the sun is completely still with relationship to the bodies within our solar system. A man's life was taken at this. I would say he was murdered for telling the truth. And Galileo faced the same fate. This was a challenge of models of reality. And this is what we're talking about, and why we're cautioning people, stay away from the fraud of so-called creation science, because it is a fraud. And the more I read of the books published by these people, the more the more I watch their videos, the more I realize that many of them are just plain old nutcases, and others are so deeply engrossed in their own models of reality and so afraid that their faith is too weak to be sustained by truth, that they have to make up a whole series of falsehoods in order to maintain what they consider to be the truth. But truth can never be served by falsehood. The truth cannot be served by a lie, nor can the truth ever be harmed by reality. And this is what I want to call on Orthodox Christians to think about. Faith is not coming into accord with a system of facts or supposed facts. Faith is an orientation of the soul toward the will of God, and the seeking the process of our salvation. Now we're again running out of time, so we can't always say everything that perhaps needs to be said or that we would like to say in the time we have. So we'll try to make a series of broadcasts, and I promise to talk a little bit about witchcraft as well, at the risk of being burned at the stake by some fundamentalist who might think I'm a little bit too much like Galileo. I wish I were more like Galileo, at least have more of his intelligence.